guys, today I'm going to be doing my January wrap up, so sharing with you all of the books that I managed to read this month. I had a really good reading month, like number wise. I read 10 books, which I am very happy with, but they were all like kind of average. I had lots of 3 and 4 stars, but no 5-star books this month. Hopefully that will change next month. But anyway, as usual, I'm going to do this in order from my least favourite reads to my most favourite, all the 3-star books that I read this month. The first one is a picture book. As I said in my like goals video or something towards the start of the year, I wanted to read more picture books this year, like children's books and things like that. So the first one I picked up was Ish by Peter H. Reynolds. I'd heard a teacher recommend this one because basically the story is about a little boy who loves to draw, but he hears a comment from his sister one day, I think it's his sister, saying that she doesn't think his drawings are very good, but he comes to accept that he can draw ish. So like he draws and enjoys it, and it doesn't matter if they don't look exactly like the real objects because he is doing the thing, if that makes sense. So it's a good like confidence boosting kind of book for children, I guess. So yeah, this was a 3-star read for me. I didn't like love the illustrations or love the story or anything. It's a nice message, but it wasn't a book that really stood out to me or anything like that. My next 3-star read was one that I honestly thought was going to be a 5-star read. I actually purchased this book sometime last year. I think I had a voucher and I wish I hadn't have bought it because I really didn't enjoy it as much as I thought I would. For me, 3 stars isn't bad. It means I enjoyed the book, but there are just things that I didn't like about it, and it's unlikely to be a book that I'll reread. So this is an adult contemporary novel. It's about a young man who lives in Italy, and an American like college student, I don't know, he's like a postgrad student or something, comes to live with him and his family, and they essentially have a bit of a romance. But this novel just didn't feel that romantic to me, which was supposed to be the whole like point. So yeah, I didn't love it. I did think that it captured the whole feeling of like a youthful obsession, like first crush kind of feeling really well, but like I said, it didn't feel like a romance or like a love story. That's because the whole focus really of this book was on lust and like the physical feelings that these characters had towards one another. That's just not what I'm interested in reading about. I think for me to feel interested in a connection between 2 characters, I need there to be some kind of like story and some kind of emotion that brings them together as well, not just physical attraction. With this book, I just felt like there was so much focus on all the physical stuff that you don't really get to know them as characters. It was very like surface level, and I just feel like I didn't know them as people. There were a few scenes in this book in particular as well that really grossed me out, and if you've read the book or if you've seen the movie, you probably can remember at least one of those scenes. They probably stuck out to you as well, and I just felt like they were trying too hard to be artistic and were actually just really gross. And yeah, not a huge fan of this book. I'm definitely going to be like unhauling this at some point. If you are a New Zealander and you're watching this and you want this book, let me know because I will totally send it to you because I don't want it. My next 3-star read is a non-fiction book, and it is Uninvited by Lisa Turkhurst. This book I was really looking forward to. I thought that it was kind of about that feeling of feeling like you don't belong, like if you go out into a social setting or just any kind of situation with a lot of people or a bunch of people, and you just feel like you don't like have a place there. That's kind of what I thought it would be about, but it kind of wasn't. It was more about overcoming if you have like a perceived failure, so you feel like you know, you got a bad mark in a test, or you missed out on a job opportunity, like you went for an interview and you didn't get the job, or you've been through like a relationship breakup where someone broke up with you, so you feel like you had like a failure in that sense. It's more about how to get past those feelings than about feeling left out in, or like you don't belong in social situations, and that was what I was interested in. There were a couple of things that like talked about that, but most of the book was about those other kinds of perceived failures. I felt that it was quite a good book for a bit of self-discovery. It's the kind of book that makes you think about why you feel the way you do in certain situations, so I found that really helpful, and it makes a lot of references to scripture that can help you with like certain feelings, but there was no practical advice as such, and yeah, just because the subject matter wasn't entirely like what I was interested in, it wasn't as great as I thought it would be. But I think if you went into it knowing it was about those feelings of if you feel like you've failed at something, I feel like people would really enjoy it for that, but just, yeah, not for the social situations thing. My final 3-star read was the Classics Clique book of the month, which was Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen. This is the 3rd Jane Austen novel that I've read, no, the 4th now. The 4th, and it has been probably my least favourite so far, unfortunately. In saying that, like I said, 3-star books for me mean that it was good. I enjoyed it. There were just things that I didn't love about it. So this one is about 2 sisters. One of them is really sensible and level-headed and rational, and the other sister is quite emotional and romantic, and yeah, so they're both kind of thinking about getting married and things like that. So the one sister is kind of like throwing herself at people and thinking she's like really in love, and the other one is a lot more standoffish and careful. So as always with Jane Austen, I loved her writing style. I loved her sense of humour, which especially came out like early on in this book. There's a character called, who is it, John Dashwood. His conversations with his wife were hilarious, so I loved that. But I just felt like this book dragged on so much. It's, I think, the longest one of her novels that I read, and it just felt like it went on, and a lot of the same sort of scenarios were kind of repeated over and over, I felt, so it kind of seemed a bit predictable. During the course of the book, nothing really much happens until there's this big like reveal at the end that I just didn't find surprising, and it was kind of like the romantic equivalent of a villainous monologue. There was like this thing that gets revealed, and then that character spends like pages and pages and pages explaining themselves and everything that happened, and yeah, it was just not my favourite way to end a book. Moving on to my 4-star reads. If you're again not that familiar with how I rate books, 4-star books are generally books that I really enjoyed. Like, I couldn't think of anything I didn't like about them so much. It's more just that it doesn't have that like 5-star, this is my favourite book of all time kind of quality. So there's like books I really enjoyed, but just not like favorites. The first one was The Auditions by Stacey Gregg. This is the first book in the Pony Club Rivals series, and as I mentioned when I hauled this with my library book haul, I just wanted to read some Stacey Gregg books because, like I said, want to read more kids books, and I loved horse books when I was a kid, so I want to see what like the current day horse books are like. This one is about a girl that really wants to go to this like prestigious horse riding school in America. She's from the UK, so she has to go through a process of like trying out to get into that school. I loved that this book had a boarding school sort of setting. It's just super fun. I loved that it had ponies in it. Again, I loved those stories as a kid, and I love that this is by a New Zealand author. The writing scenes in this book were really captivating. There's a bit of a grief storyline going on because the girl lost one of her parents, and I don't love reading those kind of storylines. I just find them too sad. But aside from that, it was a super fun book and I really enjoyed it. It reminded me a lot of like the Saddle Club and books like that I really enjoyed as a kid, so it was fun. My next 4-star read is one that I just finished reading last night, and that was The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This was a book that I really wanted to read this year. Everyone's been absolutely raving about it, and I was really looking forward to it, and I did really enjoy it. So this one is about a woman called Evelyn Hugo. She was a like old Hollywood movie star. She was around in the 1950s and onwards, and she's now in her 80s, I think, and she's kind of telling her life story and how she ended up with 7 husbands. So the book is kind of split into different sections based on which husband she was with, and it explains how she ended up marrying them and why and all that kind of thing, and all the other dramas that were going on in her life. It really highlights the fact that sometimes you think you know everything about someone, and the media does this a lot, but you're only really knowing what they want you to know about themselves, and a lot of it is very controlled and things, and I found that really interesting and really enjoyed it. There's a character in this book called Harry, and I loved him. The ending of this book was absolutely heartbreaking. Those were the things that I loved about this book. I really did enjoy reading it. I did find it get a little bit slow in the middle. I found the middle of the book a little boring. Nothing major, but just a little boring, but then it did pick up again quite soon. And the only other thing I didn't like about it was that there's a character called Monique who's like the writer who's writing Evelyn's life story or hearing about it, and they kind of give her like a little bit of a storyline, and I just wasn't interested in Monique. I was like, don't really care. But yeah, otherwise really good book and would recommend it if you're interested. My next 4-star book was a reread, and that was Molly Moon's Hypnotic Time Travel Adventure. This is the 3rd book in the Molly Moon series. Sorry about that noise, I think it's a rubbish truck or something. So this is the 3rd book in the Molly Moon series, and this one there's a bit of time travel involved and it's a really entertaining read. The first 2 books in the Molly Moon series I've given 5 stars. This one just like wasn't quite as good, and I think it's just the whole time travel storyline. When you start to add in time travel, there's a lot of like back and forth between the same scenes, and it's like not always the best. Still a great story though, and I love it. This story as well is mostly set in India, which is a wonderful setting. It's so cool, and there's a character called Ojas that I really love. He's really funny and entertaining. So yeah, really enjoyed rereading this one. My next one was a non-fiction book that I found really fascinating. It was so interesting, and that was Misreading Scripture with Western Eyes by E. Randolph Richards and Brandon J. O'Brien. So this one is essentially looking at kind of the context of some different things in the Bible and how we as Westerners misread it based on our own cultural assumptions. And it was just so interesting, because there are so many things that we take for granted as being like the way things are, but it's actually a cultural thing that has developed over time and wasn't the case back then and isn't the case in other countries. The most engaging section of this book for me was the section on what they call mores, which are basically like social norms. Social norms being like things that are socially accepted without question. So like different morals that people have these days and things like that that are just accepted as that's just the way things are. An example of that is like virtues and vices, because there are a lot of things that we think of as like virtuous, or you know, things that we think of vices that people kind of assume originate in the Bible, but they actually don't. They're cultural rather than biblical. So that's interesting. And the other one that really stood out to me was the idea of modesty, because it can be argued that when modesty is spoken about in the Bible, they're referring to economic modesty rather than sexual modesty. So I found that really fascinating, because it really gets you thinking. My final 4-star book this month was Royals by Rachel Hawkins. I have a spoiler-free review of this up, which I will link down below if you want to check it out, because I really enjoyed this book. It was so fun. It's about a girl whose sister is marrying the Prince of Scotland, so she has to go live in Scotland for a bit to understand how she should be behaving now that she's going to be related to the royal family. So it was super entertaining. There's a lot of romance and castles and things, and if you want to hear more about it, check out my review. So those are all the books that I read this month. There were some really good ones in there. If you've read any of them, let me know your thoughts, or if you're going to pick any of them up, let me know that as well. And I'll see you guys with another video in a couple of days. Bye.